I would like to welcome you all to the Series 11 Josimpama webinar series. Today we're talking about socialized or public childcare and gender equality. We know that care work initially was a communal activity. It was a communal exercise in our early days. As time, of course, moved on, as we evolved as societies, childcare became recognized as a public good and became a matter for public concern. We know that today in these advanced capitalist countries, states are slowly withdrawing their investment in the care economy, paving a way for the private sector to take over, and of course, making it more difficult for working class and middle class families to afford childcare. In our part of the world, however, we can't say that there has been any real investment by the state in childcare. This has been extremely unsatisfying for us, but we're hoping that through this discussion, we can establish amongst ourselves the fundamental socialist principle that the gender division of labor in the family must change in order to emancipate women, and therefore that social childcare becomes an essential part of any future society, and one that has both the commitment to gender equality and the interests of children at heart. So we are hoping this discussion will allow us to make an evaluation of public childcare, including unpaid childcare. And as such, we hope to learn from our panelists to share our own ideas and to begin formulating a way forward on this subject that is close to our hearts. So I would like, with that, I would like to welcome you and to introduce our panelists. Today we've got Comrade Dubulelo Mahlatse. Comrade Dubulelo Mahlatse is well known amongst our circles and the Communist Party. To introduce her, I would like to inform you that she has a national diploma in public management. She's got a BTech degree in public management, and she's got a lot of short courses. And she has served our country in a number of deployments. She has worked as a public servant in the Free State. She's a community activist, a youth activist, a member or an NOB member of the YCLSA, and of course, a member of the South African Parliament from 2019. We also expect to be joined by another panelist, Ms. Laura Alphas, who has worked with WIEGO since 2009 in the Social Protection Program. In 2017, she became its director and started working in Ghana, Tanzania, Brazil, Peru, and India. Since then, she has been involved in a number of other initiatives under the Social Protection Program, including the Health Innovations Project and Childcare Initiative. Laura is a South African who holds a PhD in Development Studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal with a focus on social policy and an MPhil from Cambridge University. She's a research associate in the Department of Sociology at Rhodes University, where she supervises postgraduate students and is involved in building and extending the Labor Studies program through the Neil Agate Labor Studies units. She's also the co-editor of the Handbook of Social Policy and Development. We also have amongst us Comrade Mark Waller. He was born in London in 1958 and joined the Communist Party when he was 20. And a few years later, went to work for the World Peace Council in Helsinki, Finland. He worked with ANC comrades in the World Peace Council and other international organizations. When the World Peace Council was downsized and moved to Athens following the end of the Soviet Union, he stayed in Finland and took Finnish citizenship. He became an active member of the Finnish Communist Party. He came to live in South Africa in 2004 and has a family here. He contributes to producing some of the Communist Party's publications in South Africa. He works as a freelance translator and a journalist. I would like to now give a comrade Dulelo the opportunity to give her input, which we hope will be 15 minutes or so. Over to you, Comrade Dulelo.
Thank you very much, Comrade Fundi. As indicated, my name is Dibulelo Mahlatsi. I'm the second Deputy National Secretary of the Young Communist League. Let me first and foremost pass my greetings to the leadership of the party, especially CC members. Let me also take my greetings to the leadership of the Young Communist League. I've noted that on the platform, the first Deputy National Secretary of the Young Communist League is with us. Let me also greet fellow panel members, Comrade Laura Alfers and Comrade Mark Waller, and all comrades and viewers on our social platforms and media platforms. As I've indicated that my name is Dibulelo Mahlatsi, I'm humbled by the invitation to this platform as a panelist to present on behalf of the Young Communist League of South Africa a perspective on public childcare. I must indicate, lastly, I must also, I've noted that amongst us, I've seen the leadership of the ANC, COSATU. Special greetings to the Minister of Women, Comrade Nkwana Mashaban, and all other comrades. This discussion comes at a very important calendar month in South Africa, where the country will be emphasizing or making an emphasis on the importance to protect women and children against gender-based violence, a scourge that has become a national crisis. However, first and foremost, I think it is important to outline or bring to the fore the importance of public childcare by the Young Communist League of South Africa. From our understanding, as Young Communists, we believe that public childcare is a secondary foundation of development of human beings towards a holistic human capacity and capability for a better life. We say secondary foundation precisely because the primary foundation is a preconceived process and the development thereof. Now, looking at the benefit of child or quality childcare, which we think that is the basis of our debate and discussion today, we think it is important that we unpack this element from an understanding that children who receive quality childcare are more likely to develop social and learning skills at a younger age. These skills help children build and maintain better relationships with parents, adults, and other children. And the benefit of receiving quality care continues into the adulthood. Secondly, highly quality childcare keeps children safe and healthy. In addition to this, it helps children to develop skills they will need to succeed in life, in schools, or in other areas of our lives outside the school. Whether you place your child at the childcare center or have someone care for your child as a caregiver at home or at your own home, the quality of care and interaction will always stay with the child for a lifetime. Comrades, as a Young Communist League, we take a child care program as a very fundamental base towards building a better society. We believe that it is important that we note that some of the reasons why quality childcare is so important is because it plays a fundamental role in brain development. The early years from birth to the age of 3 play a vital role for healthy brain development. The number and quality of adult-child connections a child receives in the early years of are very important to normal brain development. These interactions shape the way your child thinks, feels, acts, and connect with others. This experience will also affect how well your child does in school. Secondly, a child experience with a childcare provider can affect his or her speech development and social behavior. Studies have shown that the children who receive quality childcare do better in school and are better prepared for reading and maths. Also, they are more curious, are better communicators and problem solvers, and are more confident. Therefore, it is important that we unpack this element from a young communistic perspective, that why is it necessary that from where we stand, that we have a quality childcare. Now, coming to childcare, social norms and beliefs. Now, as a young communist league, we believe that women are generally burdened by numerous responsibilities, and childcare has become one of the primary features. The social reproduction of society and gender roles is a primary, if not a solemn element that has been created by capitalism or capital as number one enemy against women. I'm using the strong tone, enemy against women, because if a child is not well cared for, a woman takes solemn responsibility. Care, comrades, is integral to child development and well-being, and is an activity which parents and other caregivers attach great value. However, love aside, too much of the responsibility for childcare falls on women, especially those who are poor and vulnerable. There is an evident care gap in many countries, and care responsibilities are having negative impact on mothers and other carers. A lack of care is also damaging children, where mothers are pushed to their limits by the twin demands of caring and providing for their families. The unequal distribution of care, because it is both time-consuming and resource-intensive, is holding back women and girls from advancing in other areas of their lives. Now, speaking about women, care work, paid work, and time. Data suggests that women work for pay. When women work for pay, the amount of time they spend on care, in absolute terms and relative to men, is lower. But the reduction is not proportionate to the amount of time they spend at work. In other words, total demand on working women increase. Taking unpaid and paid work into account, women spend more time working than men do, especially in developing countries. Now, coming to an element of work, women, time and opportunity. Caring for children can be a source of joy and satisfaction, but with limited time, it also constrains women's ability to do that kind of work and to provide for their families economically. With no childcare option available, there is often a trade-off between women's reproductive work and their engagement in the labor market. The demand for children can limit women's opportunity to work outside their home. The evidence suggests that while childcare is available, women's labor force participation is higher. Having children can also affect the terms on which women work. Studies have shown, especially studies in the labor markets in both developing and developed countries, show that mothers, but not fathers, pay a significant wage penalty for having children. I'm saying this thing precisely because when you look at the scenarios where a woman is expected to work, the minute a child gets sick, a woman must take responsibility. When a child needs welfare, a woman needs responsibility. Now, looking at policy imperatives, Comrade Jenny and fellow panelists and all other comrades who are on the platform, when we look at policy perspectives in as far as government interventions, in as far as the South African country is concerned, we have government grants that are playing a fundamental role as immediate interventions. But we are saying, as a Young Communist League, government grants as an immediate intervention play a fundamental role in securing primary childcare, though it is not enough. We are saying, as a Young Communist League, there are childcare, early childcare development programs as an adopted program by government. But there is a need for government to approach the ECD program from a demagogic approach, where the focus is not only on the childcare, but a holistic approach, inclusive of the immediate need for women to play a meaningful role in supportive role and to play a meaningful role and supportive role to their children while being able to pursue their careers without having to be burdened by the reality of choice. When we speak about choice, we speak about choice being having to work and having to look after your children, or not necessarily looking after your children, but having to take a burden of not knowing what is happening with your children. Secondly, there is a need to consistently monitor government interventions and assess the impact on continuous basis. I'm very happy that on this particular platform, Minister is here. And our NEC member, Comrade Nkwani Mashabane, is here to be able to maybe to take us through interaction about the ECD program, though it might not fall within her department, is a department of social development that must take responsibility. But in myself, having worked in government, specifically in the Department of Social Development, I want to indicate that in most cases, our children do not get enough attention in as far as ECD's program are concerned. ECDs have become a program that we do nilly-willy. Yes, there are programs that need to take place that are formulated to ensure that our ECDs are properly coherent in terms of forward thinking. But however, these programs are not assisting us. Because everyone can open an ECD at any point in time and things are done. And our children are not necessarily getting what they are expected to get. Now, looking at a policy development and regulations, gender transformative or gender transformation and gender emancipation need to be infiltrated rigorously within all government policies and programs in order to change the narrative and the social norms and standards, as well as perception when it comes to childcare and women. Secondly, the transformative society, or for us to have a transformative society, we require a radical social inclined interventions, not only from government, but from those who continue to benefit enormously from the working women who continue to sell their labor to capital. Second last issue in terms of policy imperative, I think it is important that the private sector contribute towards gender mainstreaming within its sector. This sector has become the biggest beneficiary when it comes to labor and slavery of women, especially in the informal sector. I want to indicate, to make an emphasis on this particular point, I want to take us back to the coronavirus pandemic, which of course we're still facing even today. In most cases, most of the frontline workers were in the retail sector. These are young men and women, more specifically women, who may not earn serious wages in as far as regulations or policy perspectives are concerned. These are women who had to leave, most cases, their children behind and go and face this particular pandemic through labor intensive or through selling their labor in the retail sector. And I want to indicate that in most cases, these women are between our youthful age. That means these are young women who are our constituency, as they leave their children behind without formal, because all schools were closed, all ECDs were closed. What then became their, what then becomes a program for their children when they're still working. Now, why it becomes important that the public sector should provide meaningfully towards ensuring emancipation of women through programs of childcare. The public sector, the private sector is a massive contributor towards enslavement of women in terms of income. Therefore, it should be able to provide enormously in as far as childcare is concerned. Second last issue is the tightening and enforcing regulations. I don't think in the South African context, looking at our regulations in terms of our policy perspective, that there is an extensive or intensive program that ensures that our public sector and the private sector ensure that there is a serious childcare program for our children. One of the care conundrums in as far as labor is concerned and the social grants that are being given by government as immediate intervention is that the financial aid in a form of a grant and so on can only help women care for their children. But in a few cases, even explicitly address women's care related needs. But because programs were primarily designed to reduce poverty and develop human capital, participation can create care conundrum. That means the money that we receive through child grant and all these other interventions does not necessarily assist in building a better society for young women. Instead, it's putting women, young women specifically, in a much more dire situation because you rely on this particular grant that's supposedly supposed to be assisting you to build a child to develop better. But unfortunately, given the poverty situation that we found ourselves in, it becomes very difficult. Now, my concluding remarks, Honorable, oh, my apologies. My concluding remarks, Comrade Fundi, is that there is not enough care to the ground. Families are squeezed between the twin demands of working inside the home and outside the home. As a result, millions of children are being left without adult supervision, with disastrous consequences for their welfare and sometimes their lives. Therefore, women struggle to fill the gaps and face difficult trade-offs between providing care with their children and providing economically for themselves. Now, as I conclude, Chair, it is important that we note that capitalism has not only become the #1 enemy towards development of humankind, but central to dislodging women emancipation through patriarchy. Patriarchy continues to manifest itself through religion, culture, tradition, family as basic superstructures of patriarchy. For us, as a society, to progress meaningfully towards a classless society, we must first dismantle capitalism. This can be done through a progressive, especially social progressive policy shift to benefit women. The reality of South African society is to ensure that we need to build equilibrium through equity and socially transformative policies and programs. When I'm saying we need to build an equilibrium through equity, I want to indicate to the platform today, to this particular meeting, that there's a huge fundamental difference between equality and equity. South Africa remains a patriarchal society, not only because of us not being able to align ourselves with the current challenges of society, but it's because the superstructure, which is a family, where women's role is meant, where gender roles have been segregated to a point whereby, as a woman, yours is to take off a child and men is supposed to go and work. But unfortunately, with society that is evolving in the current conjuncture, we ought to see ourselves as a society that is highly unequal. Now, bringing equality, which is quite fundamental towards development and emancipation of women, we need to agree and we need to assess and analyze society from that particular perspective, that women are still at the back, are still facing challenges of triple oppression, and women need to, though it might sound a little bit ideologically disorientated what I'm going to say, but in my view, if we want to see childcare as a very central element towards development of society, we need to elevate issues that are facing women. And when I'm saying elevate issues that are facing women, I mean that women in the current conjuncture, irrespective of where they are located, they are still on the back footing, whether in government, whether in legislation, whether in church or anywhere else, we're still in the back footing. And the day we take a conscious decision and conscious perspective on ensuring that we elevate women in all spheres of government, in all spheres of society, to ensure that we build this particular equilibrium. Yes, the party and the communist ideas and communist perspective is that we are an engendered organization. But however, given for us to build this particular equilibrium, we ought to ensure that we rise above, we ensure that we elevate these issues that are affecting women, especially when it comes to childcare. These, in most cases, children who deserve childcare, whether from a public or private or through interventions of government, are within the age of 14 to 35, which is a primary constituency within the Young Communist League. So as the Young Communist League, taking forward from this particular debate and discussion, we are saying we will be taking a program on childcare very seriously. We're going to ensure that we participate meaningfully towards policy shift in as far as childcare is concerned. These are young men and women who need our undivided attention, and we would be taking this particular platform and resolution and discussions of and way forward out of this particular platform to develop a program that will take us forward, so that in the near future we are able to actually implement and speak to issues that are affecting young women. Thank you very much, Comrade Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mahlatsi. And I think, comrades, we heard her very clearly. Comrade Mahlatsi is talking about the benefits of having child care. And I think she's speaking very specifically about the risks of not having childcare for our children. And of course, we're looking at ensuring that it is socialized, it is public, it is funded by the state. And she does say that it is very important for us as we move towards a classless society, as we move towards a society that is equal, that childcare becomes one of the key indicators of that movement. And comrades, I would like now to give an opportunity to Comrade Mark Waller to continue enriching us in this discussion.
Thank you very much, Comrade Fundi, and thank you everyone for inviting me to give some few remarks about Finland, which is one of the Nordic welfare states, as you may have heard, and the context of childcare there and paternity, or paternal responsibility, if you like, within the context of the welfare society as it was envisaged and then as it turned out. Comrades, the problem with Finland, and often what I get the feeling when I'm talking about the Nordic situation or Finland, is that it's not a paradigm, you know. There are some very positive experiences there when the left had a certain amount of power, hegemony, if you like. It doesn't have that anymore, and it's no longer the kind of land of milk and honey that it used to present itself as being, although it still does actually, but it's wrong. let me just give you some remarks about the welfare state in Finland. It was founded on the idea, probably in the 50s, 60s, and 70s really developed, on the idea that welfare was far more than the provision of social safety net. It was not just worst, hunger and homelessness. It was meant to be one of the bases of social development and prosperity in the reconstruction of Finland after the Second World War. And the state was seen that it would cover basic social needs to enable people and communities to thrive and to gain employment and to move forward in that way. And this was, of course, also linked in very closely with the system of free education and free healthcare, which are co-joined. The model was created in the 60s and 70s, and it was in the 70s that it was more fully realized. And at the time, the left, the Communist Party and other left parties were very strong in society. The Communist Party was a mass party, you could say, in Finnish terms. Finland, by the way, is only 5 million people, fewer than. The Communist Party and other left parties, they actually developed and appointed experts within their ranks to really thrash out in quite sharp detail what sort of welfare policy was to be needed to take the country forward towards socialism, as they saw it then. And the aim was to go beyond making simple, generalized demands, but to specify precisely what policy changes for comprehensive social welfare were needed. And the Communist Party, for example, which in those days had MPs and elected representatives on local councils, had an appointee, a secretary, who dealt specifically with researching and formulating policy demands on welfare within a kind of very comprehensive framework. With family policy, the aim was to provide a safe and rights-based environment for children and families to thrive. And as the system developed, maternity grants and leave were guaranteed. And the maternity grant included, and I think it still does, a package of essential items like a cot, nappies, all this sort of stuff that were given to young mothers who had just given birth. Paternity leave was introduced in late 1978 to spread the responsibility of childcare between the genders. That was the idea. This was also seen as one way to break down patriarchal constructs under which women were, of course, expected to stay at home and look after the children. The system has in recent decades been pared down a lot. And compared to what the left parties originally planned. And social welfare and social policy has been greatly affected by the austerity measures taken by successive, pretty right-wing governments since the early 1990s. According to take leave from work during maternity, paternity, and parental periods of leave, that's how they're defined. The system meshes maternity, paternity, and parental leave together, with the latter ensuring that both parents can be at home together for some time, or then separately. They can decide how to spread it out. Maternity leave has been, I think it's between 30 and 50 days before a child is born, and then it extends to 4 months afterwards. That's for mothers. Until now, fathers have had just over 2 months of leave, which was much less than was originally envisaged. Parental leave is actually now being changed. There was a change of government last year, and the Social Democratic Party, which is sort of center-left party, took over from a very right-wing administration that we'd had for a long time. And so things are being revamped a little bit in a more positive direction, and parental leave will now be 6.6 6.6 months. I guess that it breaks down into a certain amount of days, but I've got 6.6 months for both mothers and fathers. So it's putting on a much more equal basis, and either by mothers and fathers separately or then together, as it had been before. Fathers are supposed to take a minimum number of days. It used to be just a few weeks. I'm not sure what it is now. But they were supposed to take a minimum, and they were encouraged to do so by employers and so on. Given the changes in the family, in the kind of what the family now means, it's not only men who can take paternity leave, it can be the partners of whatever gender of the mother or the person living with the mother, cohabitee. But of course, I mean, patriarchal attitudes persist there, and many fathers don't bother to take paternity leave. They don't bother with the entitlement. In 2017, fathers only about 10% of fathers used the right to reimbursed family leave days, and nearly 1/5 of fathers don't take any family leave at all. So there's quite a lot of campaigning going on in the NGO community and liaising with government to try to change this. When children are 2 or until they reach until they reach school age, they can attend a state daycare, or the daycare system is state run. And during this period, parents then, their parental leave morphs into what's called part-time childcare leave. So you can put your young infant in daycare, but he or she doesn't have to be there the whole time. You can take leave off work so that you can gradually introduce your child to the education system, preschool system. Leave entitlements are extended when you have more than one child at home. So there's a system of child benefits which come on top of the entitlement that you get when you take leave. And I think it increases with the number of children that you have in the family. I think the basic rate for one child is about 1,700 rand a month. But of course, you have to bear in mind the cost of living in Finland is much higher than here. Average rent, by the way, is about 20,000 rand a month, just basic rent. The Communist Party and other left parties in Finland are pushing for improvements to the system. And the fact that we now have a social democratic government is a plus. The Finnish welfare system is really a shadow of what it was initially envisaged to be. And what it started as, and spending cuts and lack of progressive input into the social policy framework down the decades have made the system more of a basic social net than what we had hoped it would be in the 70s. With parental leave and benefits, there have been some improvements since the change of government, as I mentioned, and leave entitlements and the benefits overall are being increased. The issue for the left, and it's a pared down left as well as a pared down welfare state, is to solve the problems, is to push the issue of solving the problems of social reproduction that still continue to place an unfair burden on women. And to do this by ensuring that men have greater responsibilities and rights in the home. Of course, this is not to ignore the fact that, as I said earlier, the nature of the nuclear family has changed a lot. I think the real lesson of the whole story, if you like, is that you need a strong left. If you've got a mass party, Communist Party, you've got the nuts and bolts at least for developing and pushing forward very clear policy lines. You usually find And I'll be careful where I tread here, but I mean, you usually find that the bourgeoisie and bourgeois politicians do not have a very great vision of what to do with this. They tend to have a very reductive vision of welfare anyway, and just see it as benefits that you either withdraw or take, or this kind of thing, yeah, or give. So, you know, the Communist parties, the left, when they can get their act together and when they can be united on these issues, you know, can really develop very advanced and forward-looking ideas and specific policies. And these are usually very popular among the public. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Comrade Mark, for that input. And I think it has become clear when you compare the two inputs, how important it is to build a qualitative element to our approach to childcare. And we can see that here in Finland, there's a combination of development funding by the state, even disbursements to households. And of course, it was still a challenge even in that space to ensure that we eradicate patriarchy in households. So it's still something that we have to work on. And I think as the Communist Party, we've got a big job ahead of us to ensure that we are transforming our families, we are changing them to ensure gender equality, easing this unfair burden of childcare on women. And yeah, I think the Communist Party can do it. I would now like to
May I disrupt the chair for a minute?
right.
Yes. I really feel I could have prepared myself to contribute and participate more in this very, very important debate. But I can see that our focus is on child welfare. While when Jenny was still with women, we focused more on children and women and so on and so on. In a typical African homestead or household, the child becomes a center of everything. It's not a being that brings about responsibilities, and only we see this as an addition that brings about, more reliabilities, but more as an addition to the family. That is also that children are not born in space; they are born in families, and so therefore, in a village, it takes a village to raise a child. South Africa is a very unique country. The real South Africa is 26 years old. Prior to that, mothers, not out of choice. Prior to that, mothers would during apartheid, would remain at home with children and be the custodians of children while their fathers are working in the mines and in towns, in big towns, and see their children once a year. So, one professor challenged me 2 years ago to say, referring to me, that I was the first generation of a parent or a cohort of parents, first generation, who had both parents having to take care of a child in the true sense of the word. Not just about feeding and cleaning, but also nurturing the child. In South Africa, we've been toing and froing in the 26 years to say, do fathers need a father's leave? It was almost like a norm that the mother will take 4 months to take care of the working mother. take care of the baby, and that's it. Now, recently, I heard a few months that the husband or the father to the child can come in. We are in the middle of a crisis. As the whole world is in a crisis of the pandemic, that is coronavirus, we also have a crisis of women or young women, gender-based violence, and femicide, which we do not have answers therefore. But when you look at what is the cause, or what has been the cause of this, or what was the origins of this?
Excuse me, can I just please cut in there, because we have a challenge of time, and
Yes.
we were hoping that we'll get all the inputs, then we can start discussing.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I have a problem. I have a problem because I have to leave, because I can see that.
Unfortunately, we cannot allow you to continue because it will chow the other people's.
Yes. No, I will not continue beyond this, because we
Can
are.
I ask Laura to make an input? She's going to speak briefly, so then you can be the first to speak after that, please.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I'm going to share, can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. I'm going to share my screen because I have a short presentation. I can't share my screen because of the, only the host can share the screen. So I will just, I guess, speak to my.
No, I'll correct that. I'll correct that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Apologies. Oh. Sorry, I'm now. Right. My apologies. Laura, you can now share.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jenny. So let's start from the beginning. My name is Laura Alphas, and I work for the Social Protection Program at a global network of organizations of workers in the informal economy called Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. And one of our pillars of work is actually around childcare provision, because it is such a concern for women working informally. Perhaps just to start off, just to be clear about one of the big sort of differences within the informal economy. Often the informal economy tends to be talked about as if it's, you know, one homogenous group of people. But actually there are very many different types of workers in the informal economy. And one of the big differences is between workers who are employed, informal workers who are employed, for example, such as, you know, there are many domestic workers who continue not to have social protection benefits in South Africa, and so would be classified as informal workers, but who are employed in a household. And then we have a smaller group of workers in South Africa who are self-employed workers in the informal economy. And these are the women you see in the picture on the right are women waste pickers, recyclers, informal recyclers working on a landfill site near Sasolburg. They are self-employed. And that can have very different sort of consequences when you're having to work and care for children. So self-employment is often more insecure in some ways, but it does allow some flexibility to allow women to do childcare as well. But that doesn't mean women in the informal economy don't need support with childcare, and that's one of the big myths that I hope to challenge. I also should say that the women I am talking about amongst the informal economy in this presentation are the self-employed. So the research I'm presenting is amongst the self-employed, the market traders, the street vendors, the waste pickers, people in what we call the informal sector. So just to be clear about that. So informal self-employment in the informal sector is precarious and incomes are low. The data from the quarterly labour force survey, typical earnings in the informal sector are around 2,000 Rand a month. There's no social workplace protections. And often these informal workers are operating in a very unsupportive urban environment. So, you know, working on landfill sites, you know, they're subject to harassment and enforcement from municipalities, street traders operating in public space, often, you know, have goods confiscated, or public health bylaws are used to evict them from places of work. It largely is because municipalities are not necessarily set up in their laws and regulations to recognize people working in these spaces, and also not protected by labor regulations as well. But informal self-employment in South Africa is also important in that it contributes significantly to poverty reduction, and I have cited a paper there which shows that informal employment does about as much as, I think it's cash grants, to keep people above the poverty line. So there is a really important poverty reduction element. And also for many women, it does allow them some flexibility and autonomy over their work time. So you do sometimes hear women who, although it's hard to use the word choice, choose to be self-employed because it allows them to balance with their caring roles. What we do know about this sort of gendered segmentation in the informal economy is that all over the world, and it's the same in South Africa, that women tend to be concentrated in the forms of informal employment that have a higher chance of low return. So essentially what that's saying is women tend to be in types of work where earnings are low and risks are really high. So informal self-employment is one example. Contributing family work, where women are actually just helping the family business, is another example. But even when looking at men and women in the same occupations, so doing the same job with the same sort of status and employment, so a man and a woman who are both self-employed food vendors on the side of a road, the man is likely to earn more. And recent analysis of self-employed workers in the informal sector doing the same job, men earned almost double the amount that women earn, despite doing the same work and working the same hours. So we often hear about the gender pay gap in the formal economy, and this is mirrored in the informal economy as well. So then the question is, what drives this disparity? And I mean, I would say that there's lots of elements. It can't just be put down to one thing. There's sort of violence and physical intimidation. There's a lack of bargaining power that can sometimes come into play. So I wouldn't say that it's all about care work, but certainly care work, and particularly in the case of the studies we've done, childcare is a driver of gendered income inequality. So one of the things that childcare does is, as I've mentioned, and this is a well-known phenomenon from around the world, women take up more flexible but less secure forms of employment so that they do have time to care for their children, you know, so that they're not in a regular employment relationship. And then in a study that we ran which looked at market traders and waste pickers in and around Durban, we picked up a few ways in which care impacted on women's earnings in ways that you know, weren't about reducing hours or doing different kinds of work from men, but maybe which impacted the way women earned in more subtle ways. So certainly in having to do less hours, women may have to skip days of work for childcare. So this trader said, when the weather is bad, like when it's raining and windy or very hot, because there is no shelter where I work, I cannot take the child with me, so I stay at home. And then she has to miss a day of work. And because she's self-employed, that means drawing down on savings. It can change the time of day when women are able to work. So this waste picker says, before, when I didn't have a small child, I used to work until late, around 4 or 5. This is when the trucks bring the good materials, and I feel that I am missing out on all of this. So this is about she's having to go and look after her child at the time when the most profitable recycling materials are coming into the landfill site. And we hear this a lot from street vendors as well, about not being able to work in the morning during the rush hour because they're having to prepare children for school. And then often, especially with self-employed traders, there is the option, informal workers, there is the option to bring a child to work. It's often not the preferred option, especially for waste pickers working on landfill sites, but sometimes there is no other option. And often this is seen as one of the reasons why self-employed women in the informal economy don't need any support with childcare, because you can work and look after your child at the same time. But I think anybody who's tried to work and look after a small child at the same time knows what that does to your focus and how it can compromise incomes. So this trader in Durban said, I used to bring my child to work with me. She would run around so much, sometimes she would get lost. I would spend a lot of time looking for her. And during that time, I was losing customers. So I think that's a good example of how that can impact on incomes in the informal economy. And just to say, in the COVID context, there has been some research, and the links between what's happened to women's incomes in the informal self-employment and care work has not been explicitly made. But what you can see on the right hand, I'm talking to the right hand graph, women's incomes in the informal economy have dropped significantly more than men's typical incomes. And some of that is probably down to care work. 65% of women in informal employment reported spending more time in April taking care of children, compared with 58% of men. So this study was done during or just after the April lockdown, and some of the questions were examining what had happened to women's care work. And WeGo has just run a survey in Durban, and we found very similar things, that women's care work had increased significantly over the period of the lockdown compared to men's. And that was having an impact on their ability to recover and to get back to work. There is the question of family care, of course, and in our study of informal workers in South Africa, I mean, family care is a huge source of support. The two major sources of support that women relied on when they were trying to work and care for children was sort of informal childcare centres, private childcare centres, or leaving children with grandparents. So I wouldn't want to downplay that as an important support mechanism for many of the women we spoke to. But I think we also have to recognize that there are limitations to what the support can provide. First of all, it doesn't always come free. One woman said, most members of my family are unemployed. They have kids of their own, so they look after my child and I have to support them financially for that. And that was a fairly common story that we heard. And it can also be a burden to family members. Sometimes I feel as if my child is a burden to my mother when she carries the child on her back and goes to town to run her own errands. So actually a sense of guilt about having to leave the child with her mother. And also stories about, especially women who had left their children in the rural areas but were working in urban areas, saying that they felt they were losing connection with their own children. So it's not to say that family care isn't important, but it is to say that particularly in the current sort of economic and context where families are in crisis, we are being faced with a care crisis at the moment. This economic and health crisis we are faced with is also a crisis of care in many ways, especially when schools are closed and childcare centres are closed, and families are struggling. It's very hard to think that you can, just redistribute care within the family and not require any support from outside. So for this reason, we do support the public provision of childcare. And I mean, this is for all workers. It's not just informal workers who would benefit from this, of course, but specifically for informal workers who are really at the bottom of the earnings pyramid. Childcare can be the difference. Having good public childcare can be the difference between staying above the poverty line and falling under it. And I think it's interesting to think about, and this comes from UN Women, in fact. UN Women have spoken about the triple dividend of public childcare. So it can redistribute at least some care work away from struggling women and families and onto the state, and allowing women in particular greater participation in economic life. It can create decent jobs for carers and educators, many of whom will be women. And that can disrupt the transmission of intergenerational poverty by ensuring that young children have access to good nutrition and stimulation when they are young, and by reducing reliance on, say, older girl children for care, which is something that can also happen. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Laura. You have really opened our eyes in terms of how important childcare is, especially socialized or public childcare it is for us, especially in the informal sector. The informal sector workers seem to be bearing the highest burden when it comes to the demand for childcare for their children and the impact that it has on their income generating opportunities. Thank you very much for even indicating the other issue, the connection to the pandemic, how women in the informal sector have been affected during this time. I am going to open up the floor now for all our comrades who have left all their issues and come to join us in discussion this very important issue. And we are hoping that from all these engagements, we will be able to come up with a way forward about how to ensure that we get the quality that is needed. We are able to ensure equal sharing of childcare in households, how we are able to ensure that poor women's opportunities are not squandered or they are not robbed of their income generating employment opportunities because of childcare. Comrades, I would like to see your hands up. I want to see if I only have one hand up at this moment. Okay, we are going to start with Comrade Jeremy Cronin, followed by Comrade Sandisa Oliphant. I think I would like to take maybe a few more hands and then I can hand over to the panelists to respond. So far, I only have 2 inputs. Perhaps I can add Jenny as a third participant to make an input, and then we go back to our panelists. May I please hand over to Comrade Jeremy Cronin?
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Fundi, and also thanks very much to the panelists, Comrade Dipolelo, Comrade Mark, and Comrade Laura. There was a very interesting publication, which is still available online, The Plight of the ECD Workforce, which I think was brought out by Bridge and Elifa Labantwana in April of this year, just looking at the huge and devastating impact that COVID-19 had on what is already a struggling sector in South Africa, which is both the formal and registered and unregistered creches, ECD centers, and so forth. So I think that apparently something like no one's absolutely sure how many informal creches or ECD centers there are in South Africa, but the best estimation is something like 100,000. And this is the best chance that the great majority of working class kids have of getting any kind of basic ECD foundation in their lives. There are many more, something like 2.7 million kids are in these centers. Only 700,000 of those children estimated are in formal ECDs, which are then funded or partially funded, resourced by the Department of Social Development in South Africa. And so how these operate is that they basically depend partly on subsidies, the lucky ones that are registered, But, and even they depend also on contributions from parents, basically some kind of fee that is charged per child. And then obviously COVID then and the heavy lockdown, the hard lockdown had a huge devastating impact on all of the workers employed, the caregivers employed in this sector, and of course on parents who are dependent on being able to place their children in these creches so that they could get to work, so they could look for work, or so they could do other things. A huge and a very high percentage of them were threatened with complete closure. Those working in the registered sector were able, and it's less than a quarter of these ECDs, were at least receiving some kind of reduced wage, the workers in these sectors, but the others basically were not getting anything. So a huge crisis. And I think it's very important that we look at this as the SACP and all of those who are concerned about socializing the childcare function, because we do have, you know, the rudiments of it, but we need to work with the reality of South Africa and understanding. So I'm really pleased to see that one of the most important announcements in terms of the rescue packages, that have been announced in terms of mass employment, has been to focus on this sector. So something like 760 Rand a month is going to be available to 83,000 caregivers working in ECDs, both the registered ones as well as the unregistered ones, which I think is critical. Another 25,000 is going to help, another 25,000 are going to be deployed in order to assist with registering, to enable these ECD centers to register, and so on and so forth. And I do believe that the YCL and the SACP and all of those concerned about gender equity and this huge crisis that we've got of early childhood support and of caregiving, we need to look at these things. I mean, I think one of the problems, for instance, is that the 760 per month for 83,000 of these caregivers is only going to last for some 6 months. And then will be, but the crisis will continue. So I think amongst other things, we need to as the party, as the SACP, the YCL and others, we need to look at these basically progressive interventions by way of employment, of mass employment, but make sure that they are, you know, significantly increased and are continued beyond just a short 6-month period, because the crisis is deep-seated and structural and lasting. And the one last point I want to make, and I'm sorry for talking as long as I am, is that one of the problems with the ECDs is that the Department of Social Development has set very, I think, inappropriate conditions in order to be registered. You know, kind of first world standards for ECDs, when the reality and the conditions under which these caregivers are operating are very, very different from those realities. And again, I'm pleased to see that there is now some focus on assisting the unregistered to register, but also looking at the often inappropriate requirements of registration. But thanks very much, and a great appreciation for this session. I think this caregiver thing is so critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Jeremy.
Oh, thank you so much, Comrade Fundi. I won't waste any more time. I just wanted to say that I think from where I'm sitting currently, I also want to apologize because I didn't hear the earlier presentation properly, because I had to take care of these childcare responsibilities. As I'm sitting here in this meeting, I'm also assisting my son with his grade 2 homework. So I must apologize, but I did get Comrade Laura's presentation, and I was quite moved by it. And the reason for me being so moved by it is that last year, sometime, I had a lady who was assisting me at home, and this lady then indicated to me that her child, who who's the same age as one of my sons, he was 6, she was 6 at that time, was raped by a relative. And this happened because she had separated with the husband, and now she had to find employment and had to leave the daughter with the husband and the husband's family. And then this relative then repeatedly raped this young girl. The point that I wanted to make then is, even though I was trying to assist this lady to say, I understand, I can try to assist you to get intervention from the social workers, she decided that given this situation, she would rather stay at home and look after her children than be employed. So I'm saying that the challenges that Comrade Laura was highlighting are challenges that we are confronted with at very real and direct levels. So I'm hoping really that there could be some solutions and inputs that can be made to maybe formalize this sector, so that people like the lady who was assisting me can be in a position to be assisted. I'm quite moved by the plight that Comrade Laura has shared with us regarding the informal sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Comrade Sandisa. Comrade Jenny,
Thanks,
I would
Comrade.
invite you to make an intervention now.
Thanks, Comrade Fundi, and thank you very much to the presenters, and in fact to the two comrades who've just spoken as well. There is so much that we need to be unpacking in this. I can see that we are heading in 2021 for a number of other webinars that enable us to engage with aspects of this in more detail. I think for me, the one element that I want to lift up is that focusing on the need for us to transform the gender division of labor in not only the economy, the workplace, the community, politics, and most importantly for this topic, in the family, is an absolutely fundamental element of our approach to gender equality. But if it does not go with changing the patriarchal culture and attitudes, we will find the kind of experience that Comrade Mark indicated of there are very good provisions. And in fact, it's one of the things that South African women have responded to say, don't give men paternity leave at the time of a birth, because they're not going to help me. All they're going to do is go and sit in the shebeen and celebrate the fact that there's a child that's been born. So those issues of the transformative nature of the work that needs to be done is a critically important part of it. I think that it's been very useful in the process of the discussions to reflect on the complexity of forms of childcare that are provided. The employment of domestic workers to look after children in the private space of one's own home, the process of commodified, privatized, upmarket provision of childcare that only the wealthy can afford, the issue of the informal mechanisms that are taking place. And I do think that it is an area that, picking up on from what Comrade Dipolelo was talking about, the policy work around forms of childcare become a very important part of it. And I think that we need to ensure that we explore the issue of cooperatives, of collective, of socialized forms of childcare very importantly. And perhaps there we need to be reflecting on the experiences of socialist countries who have taken very seriously the issue of provision of socialized childcare. But I think we've also got to ensure that we don't fall into the status trap of saying government must provide. We have, in a sense, organic forms of childcare that have been developed in our communities, and how do we ensure that we build and strengthen those aspects? For me, there's a very interesting relationship between approaching childcare from the perspective of the interests of the child and approaching childcare from the interests of the parents. And obviously our approach has got to find the combination of that. And one of the elements for me that is important around childcare and socialized public childcare is what role can childcare be playing in a gender transformative socialization process, so that children, as they are being looked after in socialized and public childcare, are actually getting a gender equality socialization process, so that we are not, in a sense, reinforcing gender stereotypes. I thought it would also be useful just to reflect on some of the history that we have as the party and the alliance. You know, in Comrade Ray Alexander in the 1940s and 50s organized in the Food and Canning Workers Union, which was a predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly a sector that had women employed in the canning factories. And they took up and won a demand for workplace-based childcare. Very important for breastfeeding, very important for children who were ill and needed medication and needed to be able to be monitored by parents during the process of the day. And those demands were fought for really hard and won. Is that part of what we are seeing in the trade union movement now to ensure that those kinds of gains and victories are part of the trade union movement? But we also then set up in 1992 a creche designed to service the head offices of the ANC, the party, COSATU affiliates, where a number of us had young children, and we were faced now with the situation of what do we do? Take our kids to work and land up with that difficulty of you trying to do your work and at the same time concentrate on a child, not an easy process. And we set up a childcare, a creche, staffed by cadres, so that we knew that the ideological content of what was going to be given to our children in those creches was going to be aligned to the National Democratic Revolution and the future we were trying to build. It was not sustained. And for me, part of what we need to look at is, why do we take these initiatives and they do not become sustained? Because equally, when we went to Parliament, we set up a parliamentary creche. Today, there is no parliamentary creche. That creche gave space to the children of cleaners in Parliament, the clerical staff, the political staff in Parliament, MPs, ministers. If Madiba had wanted his grandchildren to be there, they would have been able to be accommodated there as well. A unique and extraordinary process of a non-racial, cross-party, cross-class, wonderful process, and again, not sustained. So I think for me, those are critical issues that we need to look at. And the impact of austerity macroeconomic policy on childcare is a critical part that we need to lift up. So when we are campaigning against austerity and against corruption for that matter, and the shifting of resources away from these types of projects, we need to be able to look at it very strongly. So I think for me, those are the kinds of issues that we need to be looking at. I do think that we are going to need to come back to this topic from a number of different angles to deepen our understanding and to deepen our policy work around what are the policy options that we should be ensuring are put forward. And with that, a very, very strong fight for them to be budgeted for, because with the current macroeconomic framework, childcare is certainly not going to get the kind of support that it requires to be able to address the need on the ground. Thanks, Comrade Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Jenny. I would like Comrade Sheila to prepare herself to make an engagement after our panelists have maybe responded to the inputs from the floor. I invite Laura maybe to start giving a response to the inputs.
Thanks, Chair. I think those were really interesting and very heartening reflections from my perspective. I think on Jenny's point about, first of all, I've tried to share a really nice poster from the ECD Reform Coalition in the chat, but I'm not sure if it's actually got through. But it has 5 recommendations, which I thought were really interesting about, how we could work with informal childcare centres to formalize them in a way, because too many of them are being cut out of the state subsidy as it stands.
Yes, it has got through. It has got through.
Okay, great. I think on the point about transforming the gendered patriarchal culture, I think this is really also a key point, and I think it's where public childcare could play a role as well. So, for example, WeGo has affiliates from all over the world, and one of our biggest is the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, and they run their own cooperative childcare cooperatives within their organization. And they have a parents' meeting once a month where they have worked really hard to get fathers to come to the meetings, and using the childcare centre as a stepping stone to increase participation of men in childcare. And they have noticed some real changes around that. I think that's the other thing, that childcare centres can be a real source of organising support. Many of the organisations we work with who are trying to find commonalities amongst informal workers to organise, find that provision of a childcare centre is actually what you need to do. It can be a great place for people to come together because everybody cares about their children. So that's just one point I wanted to make. On the complexity of forms, I think that's a really, really important issue, and I think there's a lot of unpacking to be done around that. We are at WeGo starting a small research project looking at cooperatives, childcare cooperatives in India and Argentina that have been initiated and set up by worker organizations in the informal economy, and which are now looking to engage with the state to sort of try and create some kind of hybrid mechanism where they could get more state funding. Because in the current crisis, informal workers are not able to contribute the fees. I mean, cooperatives still charge. And so there's a need to think about how those cooperatives can actually be made sustainable. So we are hoping to look at those, and it would be very interesting to report back on that. We do also have a really interesting example from Brazil from many years ago. I mean, Brazil now has, things are changing rapidly in Brazil, but while the left government was still in charge, they did have free daycare. But prior to the free daycare, there was a cooperative of waste pickers who had started their own daycare centre and had then engaged with their local municipality to actually begin supporting what they had started. And that's become very sustainable. And it has the added advantage of when workers start their own cooperatives or their own childcare centres, there's a sense of trust in who is looking after your children. And that can be one of the big problems with socialised childcare, that people don't trust. I mean, we often see in developing countries, Thailand, India, people don't want to send their children to the childcare centre, actually, that the state has provided, because they don't trust the quality of care that the kids are getting. But if it's grown from the community, and if parents know the people who are looking after their children, there's a sense of trust that grows up about that. So I do think, finding the sweet spot between sustainability and public financing and kind of community involvement, and the forms that can do that is, I think, really important. Thanks, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Can you please have Dibulelo?
Thank you very much, Comrade Fundi. I just want to speak on the ECD program. I agree fully with Comrade Jeremy when he says there is a need to look into this particular program, and as well as Comrade Jenny on the sustainability of this particular program. Having worked in a particular department, especially social development, one can speak with a knowledge that ECD's program are not necessarily programs that are taken seriously, if I may say. For instance, we have taken a conscious decision that we are going to take basic ECDs to basic education as government, as the ANC, as the movement, but that process, that transition has not yet transpired, precisely because we are not taking it very seriously. And on the same breath, I would also want to speak about the childcare, the combination of childcare and women and parent. As Comrade Jenny was indicating, that yes, we shouldn't be looking at either parent versus the other, but maybe we need to look at combining the two, looking at it holistically. As I was making my research when preparing for this particular meeting, when you look at Cuba, they've got a demagogic approach towards childcare, where you bring all the elements, including healthcare, into the fore when you're speaking about a childcare. But one of the things that I also looked at, when you look at China and other countries, even Venezuela for that matter, when they deal with ECD or early childhood development, they take the best educators to this primary foundation of development. Instead, as ourselves in the country, our focus is much more on higher education, not focusing, not bringing the best out of the best in ensuring that the foundation is solid. Now, lastly is on the organic forms. I want to strongly agree and believe that this is what we need to look into. We need to strengthen this element, but the very, very last part is a patriarchal element. Now, where I want to indicate that patriarchy is a societal element, is a societal norm. We need to change the patterns in society. Therefore, that's where the party, the Young Communist League, and all other MDM forces come into play to say, how then do we change the perception about society when it comes to women and childcare? Where do we find a convergence where men really come into the fore and taking responsibility? Therefore, we need to have programs that are bringing men on board to say, no, let's change the social reproduction forms and narrative about what the role and the gender roles of women in society. Now, I want to believe all the inputs that came through in the discussion today, including both from the panelists, are adding quite value to ourselves as a Young Communist League, and we also want to engage the two panelists moving forward on how to restructure our programs toward to ensuring that healthcare becomes a fundamental and a very central program of the Young Communist League. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dibulelo. Can we please have a response from Comrade Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think what I was saying about Finland really is interesting from a historical perspective. Of course, I don't know what's going to happen there, but what goes wrong if everything is left up to the state? In those countries like Finland, there's very little sense of community, and people are very isolated. Families are often very, very small and fragmented, and so on. And so if you like, the historical mistake perhaps of the left was to think that this could all be done as a great blueprint by the state. And then what happens under capitalism is that, of course, you get periods of austerity. When things go wrong with capitalism, the first thing to go is social policy and so on. It's never defense policy. So, so the great strength in South Africa, the wonderful sort of source of inspiration and strength, or rather potential, is what is happening on a community level, and childcare grown from the community, as Laura phrased it, I think is a particular strength. You do, of course, need the state. You need state money, but it's got to come from the other direction too, from the grassroots. I think what Lelo was saying about the problem of bringing men on board, it remains a huge obstacle, not only a problem of not involving men, but patriarchy itself is an obstacle to social development and to early childhood education, I would say. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Comrade Mark. I just wanted to check with Comrade Sheila if she wanted. I was hoping that she would add a little nugget to this discussion. Comrade Sheila.
Thanks, Comrade Fundi. It's been a very fascinating discussion, and it's really opened for me a whole lot of old discussions and discussions we've had over the years. I am aware of a number of women who are domestic workers, and I'm kind of referring back a bit to Comrade Jeremy's input, who are wanting to register at TVET colleges to do ECD studies, because some of the TVET colleges have ECD programs, and they are looking at this as a panacea of their way out of domestic worker work. And when I have engaged one or two of them around how they will set it up, what premises they will use, how they will get access to what they require, there's a silence that comes into the conversation, because I think that it's being held up in many ways as a way out of the poverty of being a domestic worker, or the grind of being a domestic worker. And as many of them as domestic workers are in any event looking after children and enjoy that aspect of their domestic work, they see this as a way, as a step out of the kind of grudge work of domestic work. So I think that there's a cautionary aspect to it, of if we don't come up with the kinds of policies that have been discussed at the seminar, it becomes just another angle of hope for people, that might well be dampened. And I've also been thinking enormously around the issue of home-based carers, although I know it's not early childhood development per se. But people who are home-based carers are in much the same kind of critical situation and really, really vulnerable space. And thereby is a whole other issue that we need to be taken up. And we need to just realize that the way the state has dealt with the issue of community health workers has muddied the waters, because not all home-based carers are community health workers. So I think that it's opened up another aspect of vulnerable women and vulnerable women workers in the kind of domesticated work that they do. Because let's remember that both home-based care and early childhood development is very much predicated on the issue of domestic work of some sort. So I want to thank the speakers particularly for opening up a lot of spaces. And I think it would be very interesting for each of these to be put into some kind of an umsebenzi, so that we have an umsebenzi with the inputs of all of them, because how many of us, there are 12, 15 of us on this. And I really think it's a debate that needs to be opened up a lot wider than just the 15 of us who attended this. But thanks, and Comrade Fundi, I also want to thank you for your really tight way in which you ran the webinar. It was really very, very nicely done in an assertive and yet very genuine and feminist way. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Comrade Shula. Can I go back to, because I see a lot of colleagues who are participating in this webinar, but I think we only have like 10, maybe we can extend by another 10. Can I go back to Comrade Ngwana Mashabane, because she had something critical to share with us. And I would like to comrades like Koliswa and Wendy and the others to sort of prepare themselves to help us close the webinar. Comrade Mashabane, Nkwana Mashabane. I saw that she was still connected because I was going through the participants. Is there any input that you'd like to, perhaps as the last input, Comrade Fihlan?
Hello.
We can hear you, Comrade.
Okay, I'm trying to get in a nice place. Okay. Thank you very much, Comrade Fundi. Unfortunately, I joined late, but I caught up to some of the presentations. And I think this is a very interesting debate, which is some of the issues that have been put forward by the party to make sure that women are also like any other person, not necessarily, especially when you're dealing with the issues of ECD, because those matters are left in there. So I think a follow-up of some of the matters and some of the resolutions that have been taken forward so that patriarchal tendencies that are in the institutions that we serve, starting from the homes of our domestic workers, because we do not know what is happening with our domestic workers first, before even you go outside your own institution that you're working with, or in the society, in the church, or in the stockfield that you are at. So where we belong, some of the organizations that are within our societies. So I think it's very important on some of those issues so that we make sure that we follow up so that women are free to deal with many of those issues, especially in the issue of the childcare that touches most. I've heard Tibulelo, I don't know if it goes, okay, it's me who goes the other way. Yeah, it was very, really, Comrade Sheila, I'm really impressed in how Comrade Fundi also channeled us. I'm saying, though I joined late from another task, I'm sorry to do that. But so far, with some of the discussions that I've got, I'm sure Comrade Jenny, in terms of the way forward, will be able to touch up some of the issues and put in our own program, focusing on many issues and following up in where we are, not necessarily in the parliaments or councils, because there are various areas where we are at. When you talk about sites of power, the key sites of power, there are various those areas, so that in terms of leveling the ground is really leveled. Thank you very much, Comrade Fundi. Thank you very much, comrades. Amandla, let's move forward to total women emancipation.
I'll wait too. Thank you, Comrade Koliswa. I just want to check if there's no one who wants to maybe breathe, because our time, yeah, we only have 5 minutes. If I could just, if people can just speak into the mic if they wanted to make any inputs. If there's no one, comrades, I will not delay you anymore. I would like to go back and thank each and every one of you who has attended this webinar. I would like to apologize, number one, for not doing the protocols. I do recognize our Central Committee members who are part of this webinar. And I do recognize our Minister of the Ministry of Women. And I also thank our panelists. They have taken time out of their busy schedules to make this webinar a meaningful webinar and discussion. And comrades, I think I will promise that between Comrade Yolanda and Comrade Jenny and myself, we'll try to consolidate the inputs so that they can be available, especially the discussion part, so that it can be available for our ongoing discussions on this issue, because it is true that 2 hours is not enough for us to have a, what can I say, a comprehensive discussion around these issues. The things that have come up, of course, are the shifts in our societies from investing in childcare and the shift towards withdrawing investments in childcare, and that was for the richer nations. For us who have come out of apartheid in 1994, we never really had anything we call an investment in childcare in ECD. It's something that we were hoping that we would have, and that it would be done on a large scale in the post-94 period. However, there were a lot of issues to be dealt with. So as we continue to look at these issues, we are hamstrung by the size of our budget. We are hamstrung by different interests. So really we need a very deep discussion around these issues so that whatever policies we have, we evaluate them in terms of how far they are helping us towards ensuring that all children get quality childcare. So we're looking at a range of approaches: socialized childcare, publicly funded childcare, and of course we do have private childcare for those who can afford to pay those high fees for childcare. And we are also looking at how do working class women, all of them, benefit from childcare provisions. So we've got a lot of work to do. We know that YCL and the Communist Party have to do more work, deeper work on the issue of childcare. I would like to thank you all, comrades. You have helped us to go forward in looking at the issue of childcare in the party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Fundi.
Thank you, Fundi. Thank you very much, Comrade Fundi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Ah.
you.
Dankie, dankie. Hallo, Nana.
Comrades.
Bye.